Hi, welcome to the Surfside Towers South Collapse webinar produced by Construction Solutions. We are an engineering firm based in Northeast Florida. We specialize in oceanfront condominium complexes. We produce plans and specifications for building repairs. We conduct project oversight. We help condominium board members choose contractors. We do all sorts of different things with condominium associations, mainly associated with the exterior envelope of the building. We serve Northeast Florida and basically all of the Southeast area of, South Georgia, Central Florida. We could sometimes get down to South Florida as well. I am Jason Hambrecht, President and CEO. I'm a licensed general contractor and a licensed community association manager.
And I'm Jeff Sellers. I'm the Vice President and Principal Engineer of Construction Solutions, and I'm a registered professional engineer in the state of Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina.
And so we've put together this webinar because we were getting a lot of questions from our clients associated with the building collapse that happened this year, 2021. And rather than answer questions all day to our clients, we figured we'd put this together for a quick reference. We made a list of the most common questions that we've been asked. These are actual questions that our clients have been asking us. So we're just going to go over them for everybody at the same time. So it's more streamlined and people can have access to this when they need it.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that this is just for informational purposes. There's currently ongoing investigations. There's lawsuits that are pending right now. So there's a lot that surrounds that. This should in no way be intended to make any kind of claims regarding those matters. What we're really trying to do is just inform our clients and inform the communities through our experience with buildings and coastal buildings in particular, and then also hope to provide some information to our clients so they can make the right decisions. Some of the main question that we get is, why did the Champlain Towers collapse in Surfside? And basically, the primary focus, while it's a combination of things, the primary focus is that there is deterioration of structural concrete, and there was long-term deferred maintenance. And that's an issue when there's something called spalling that happens to concrete, where cracks can develop on the exterior. The migration of moisture into these exposed structural elements causes the breakdown of the cement matrix and causes the reinforcing inside of the concrete to start to corrode and rust. And that can create forces that causes spalling. And so if you develop a crack, the moisture just goes deeper into these elements. And so really it's about neglecting long-term issues with the building that need to be addressed in a more timely manner.
Jeff, and I've been getting a lot of these questions. Can you just go over what is a spall?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question, Jason. So a spall is essentially where there is rusting, reinforcing happening, and that rusting, reinforcing causes a pressure on the inside of the concrete. There's a tension pressure. And much like glass, concrete does very well in compression, but not in bending. And so if there's any kind of internal force on the cement, it can actually cause that cement to crack and break away. So the actual breakaway part is what's called a spall. And that's where you might see what looks like kind of like a little spot on the building where concrete is missing, and you can actually see the reinforcing inside of the concrete.
And one of the buzzwords the media has been using has been below grade. And I've had a couple of clients ask about the condition of their below grade at their buildings, which is something we deal with quite often. Can you just kind of go into that a little bit real quick?
Yeah, that's a great point, because one of the things that you can do for the concrete is you can protect it. So exterior concrete is very susceptible to the exterior environment, particularly in coastal areas where, let's say like oceanfront and waterfront buildings that are in high salient environments like the marine or the ocean environment. There are things in the air and in the salt in the air and in the water that cause these elements with the concrete to essentially react in a negative way. And so the sodium chloride, the salt that's in the air, can get down with the moisture, say with just normal rain and humidity, that can get inside of the concrete. And so protecting the concrete is one of the best things you can do to prevent that chloride infiltration. And much like an above grade waterproofing or say sealants and paint, what's below grade or underground is even more important, because in our area in Florida, most of the times the soil is wet, just below the ground surface. And so below grade waterproofing has to be something that is intended for long-term exposure to submerged conditions.
Great, great. Another question that we've gotten is, how did this building collapse?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way that the building collapsed was there was structural failure of an elevated parking garage that was on exposed columns. And there had been, as I understand, there had been years and years of reports of exterior exposed concrete that was noted to be deteriorated and in need of repair. And several years had gone by since the last report done in 2018. And just in a short time period, there can be an exponential increase in the amount of deterioration, particularly for a direct oceanfront building. So in this case, there was a failure of a column to slab interface on the parking deck, and as that slab collapsed, it actually pulled the columns out from underneath the south tower, and that's what began the domino effect for that building.
And again, this is based on what we've learned so far. Obviously, investigations are still ongoing, and things probably will change. But as of now, that seems to be what everybody's theory is.
Right, and I think it's important to note there's lots of information you can find online, news sources. Wikipedia has a great page. You can actually download the most recent engineering report that was provided back in 2018. It's a PDF that you can actually just go read if you have any interest in that. But
Right. Another question we've been getting is and this is a big one. People have been asking if this is going to happen to their building. A lot of people have been sort of nervous, especially people in higher rise buildings. You can imagine you see a building collapse on the news over and over again, and all these tragic things happen, and you're sleeping on the 12th floor of a condo in Jacksonville Beach or something. So what do we say to somebody that asks a question like that?
That's a very valid question. I think one of the things we have to be sure is to not be alarmed or have any kind of deep concern that's unfounded. Now, if there are things that need to be fixed to the buildings, if you haven't had an inspection done in a while, you should be having regular inspections. If you see anything that's out of place, like cracks or anything that seems odd, you should be pointing that out to other owners, your condominium board. If you have a property manager, that would be the first step, and then getting in a building professional, a company who specializes in the evaluation of buildings. That's what you should really start with. I don't think that there's a way that we can really answer that question, but I think it starts with the inspection. While it's very highly unlikely, statistically speaking, for that to happen, probability that there's a small probability that could happen. I think up until recently, it's something that we thought that might not have been possible, but at this point, I think there needs to be a little bit better focus on doing regular inspections.
Right, and obviously a full collapse in a high-rise building is one thing to be concerned with, but there are smaller things that can happen on buildings, such as singular balconies that can collapse, and everybody's seen horror stories in the news throughout the years. So there's definitely a range of bad things that can happen.
I think that's a good point. I think that speaks to, there could be localized failure of certain elements that could pose a potential for property damage and or injury or death, but those things need to be taken seriously, even though it might not be a total collapse of the building. So even if you see something that looks out of place, or like a crack or something that might need to be looked at more closely by a building professional, that's something that you would want to bring to the attention to your association or your property manager.
Next question, what should we do to prevent our building from deterioration?
That's a great question. We hear that a lot. So again, I believe it starts with the inspections. I think what you can do, though, is you need to stay up on your maintenance schedules. If there are things that are wrong with the building, we need to come up with a recommendation, give some plans and some details and a written scope. You need to hire qualified contractors that know what they're doing, that can pull permits. And so there's a right and a wrong way to do things, but I think what the right way to do thing is to be proactive rather than reactive, and staying on top of your maintenance and your repairs and getting them done in a timely manner. That's the biggest thing that you can do. And being focused on waterproofing and sealants, and of course, anything structural like concrete repair or deterioration with steel or wood or masonry. These are some of the things that you want to do. And protection is the key. So providing a building envelope that has good protection to its structural elements to prevent things from getting wet or deteriorating. That's really what you should be focused on.
Okay. And how do we know if our building is safe? That's that's a tough question to answer.
Right. That's like the $20,000 pyramid. We get these questions quite often. And the short answer is that there's no way to know without doing an inspection, without doing an evaluation, without reviewing reports that have been put on file. There's certainly, it would start with an inspection or start with a problem. If you don't see anything wrong with your building, or if you're doing the regular maintenance and you have had inspections frequently, I would say that that's a start. So of course, everything would start with a visual, but the only way to know would be to kind of go back to the original plans, perform an analysis, perform a review, and then also come out to the site to make sure that the building is built according to the original plans. And then, kind of find out what sufficiency and then what you have, and try to compare and contrast, and then look for areas that might need to have repair, or look for areas that might not fit the mold. And so you're going to have an evaluation done to be able to make that determination.
I mean, you would never really know for sure. I mean, there's always some strange anomaly that can happen in any building, really, whether it's just even a fire, there's always something that could potentially happen. I don't think anybody in this building in Southside or Surfside expected it to collapse. So it was a surprise. It was a surprise to us, and we do this for a living.
Certainly.
We look at buildings every day, and seeing that video was a little bit shocking because it's just something we don't see. What type of inspection do you recommend at this time?
That's a great question. And so like we were talking about inspections before, about having your building looked at by a registered professional engineer or a registered architect or a company that specializes in building inspections, you want to make sure that you're not just calling up, say, like a home inspector to look at a high-rise threshold, multi-story type condominium building. These are, commercial and multifamily buildings are special in a sense that there's a lot of complicated, dynamic parts and components and assemblies to the building. And so you really want to be hiring an engineering firm, in my opinion, that specializes in, forensics, testing. We do water testing. We look into components and assemblies. We test those assemblies, and then we write reports. You would be getting a professional report written that has recommendations on what to do with the findings and observations, and not just deferring that to someone else to come up with. So it always starts with a visual though. So the first inspection will always be a visual, just to come out and give a cursory review. You might hear the term exterior envelope used frequently in our industry, because that is really looking at the outside of the buildings or the outside of the property and making an assessment there. And then once you've done a visual, or if you've identified any areas that have to go to the next level, then that would be kind of a further investigation step. So
right. And what you don't want to do is rely on the quote handyman that's been on the property for 10 years and tells everybody that everything's okay. A lot of times when we get on projects and buildings that are a little bit older, and we look at them for the first time, that's typically one of the biggest problems a condominium association has had, is they've relied on a handyman or a board member that used to be in construction, or somebody that doesn't really know how to look at these buildings. And neglect can occur when that happens, whether it's intentional or not. A lot of times it just unintentionally happens because the people looking at it think everything's okay, but they're missing important key components.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jason. There's a lot of times we'll come to buildings, and just through our experience, we start noticing things that other people didn't, readily notice, or we will see things that seem quite apparent to us through trained professional eyes versus someone that's on site that's just running around trying to do preventive maintenance type work. We kind of take a step back and look at it from a different lens.
Mm-hmm. How often should our building be inspected? That's one we get a lot.
That's a great question. I'd usually say that annually is the good sounding board. So our clients, we say, look, you should have us come out or have a design professional come out and look at your building at least once a year. And I would say no longer than biannually, every other year. Because if you find something one year and you don't address it and you come back the next year, it could be significantly worse. The reason we recommend annually is also because if you have to do a repair to the exterior of the building, there might be minimal or no structural repair, but if you leave it for a year or two, you might end up having to do structural repair. And what we typically find is that doing a structural repair to the building is much more expensive than fixing just something on the exterior with the envelope, like with sealant repair or a stucco repair or something of that nature, versus getting in and having to perform a concrete repair or maybe do a repair to a steel element like a steel beam or a steel column. That's where it gets quite expensive because you have to bring in specialty contractors and it gets really expensive.
Great. There's been a lot of questions, and the media has been mentioning a 40-year inspection, which is a Miami-Dade County requirement. What's included in a 40-year inspection, Joe?
That's a great question. So in Miami-Dade and Broward counties in South Florida, those are currently the only two counties that have, as far as I know, a recommendation to do what's called a 40-year inspection. So any building that gets to be 40 years has to have an inspection of life safety items. And predominantly that's for electrical and structural components. But those are very detailed, in-depth investigations. Those start with a visual, but they quite often will get into a more deeper dive into the components and assemblies of, say, the electrical or life safety items or structural items. You might end up having to do cores of areas of concrete, or you might have to dig into some of the components of how, say, a column ties into a slab, or the components of a beam. So you might have to be performing a more in-depth analysis, and that would start with the original plans. And then you're really making sure that it's sufficient for today's design standards. And so it's an in-depth process. I think it's important to know that these are usually very costly. They take typically around a year to complete because of all the work that's required. And at the end of that, you have to show that you've performed your due diligence, you've done an analysis, you've reviewed everything, and that you've also identified any areas that need improvement or things of obsolescence that need to be corrected. And then they've also been corrected and implemented to be able to get the certification. So this is very specific to two counties in South Florida. Right now, there's no decision in legislature that has expanded that to the rest of the state. I think you were mentioning earlier about there's been some recent discussion about that.
Yeah, it looks like there will be more requirements statewide based on what we've been reading. And it looks like that none of that will be implemented until the beginning of 2022, or they won't even start really looking at it through the legislature till January 2022. So at this time, it doesn't look like anything's going to change till next year, but we think that there will be different requirements statewide, particularly for higher rise buildings.
I think so. I think for high-rise coastal buildings, we can likely see some changes coming. And I think it's important to note that that doesn't mean that you can't opt to do a voluntary inspection. Now, it's required for Miami-Dade and Broward counties. And as a matter of fact, if you guys would like to look up what the guidelines are, miamidade.gov actually has a pretty good guideline that is the basis for those inspections. And I think it's very likely that these will get extended to coastal high-rise buildings, particularly ones that are within or greater than that 40-year mark.
Right. And a couple of owners have called us and asked us, how do I know when my building was last inspected? And we've been telling them if they're not on a board or they're new to the property, best thing you can do is, if you know a board member, reach out to your board of directors first. They're typically going to be your first point of contact to get that information. And a lot of condo associations will have a property manager or a community association manager. And if owners have direct access to those individuals, they're also a really good resource. And also attending board meetings. It's important that, I think, if you're concerned and if you're asking this question, you should probably attend board meetings and become involved and ask these questions in the open forum at a board meeting. And it's important for owners to get involved because sometimes boards can, sort of go in cruise control and not realize that they need to be looking at things a little bit closer. So it's definitely a good question.
I think it's also important to state too that associations and boards should be keeping a repository of all their reports, of all their documents. If you haven't had your original plans scanned into an electronic file and made into a PDF, now's a great time to do that, because every time somebody comes to try to check out plans, what we find, especially with older buildings, is that there might be just a hodgepodge set of plans left around. We're working on an older building right now where I can't seem to find any architectural structural drawings. And those are very important to kind of memorialize. There was even an issue where the building department had an issue with their plans room. And so plans can get lost. And I think it's important to make it known of when the reports are done and to save those and to create an electronic file and record, because when we're going back to do a forensic evaluation, it's good to have those documents to refer to, because it's almost like leads you down the right path early on without having to spend a lot of time reinventing information that could have already been readily available.
Yeah. Next up, who should I call to inspect our building?
It's a great question. Call us.
Yeah. I guess the more important question is who not to call to do a building inspection.
That's fair. Like I said earlier, I think the people that should be inspecting your building should be, a design professional, a company that has a registered professional engineer or a licensed architect on staff that is familiar with performing inspections and doing the evaluation, the analysis, and also the design of repairs and improvements. So that's a key important factor that you should be looking for on whomever it is you hire to inspect your building. And, I always say that if it's not us, I sure hope it's somebody that has our qualifications or better. So make sure you at least do your due diligence and look at the history of their projects, look at their website, talk to their past clients, and make sure that you're hiring somebody that has the qualifications and the experience that you need.
Great. And that's it. Those are all the questions we've had thus far, at least the ones we filtered through that we thought would be good for the group to hear.
Yeah.
Our contact info is on the screen. Yeah.
We have 2 offices in Northeast Florida. One is at Amelia Island. The other one is at Ponte Vedra Beach. We currently do work anywhere from, say, like Central Florida all the way up through Hilton Head. And we have some projects that are out in the Panhandle. We've done some work in South Florida. If you're looking to get in touch with us, feel free to call, set up an appointment. We can do a conference call or a Zoom call or make an in-person appointment with you to discuss what your needs might be and how we may be of service.
Thanks, everybody.
Right.
Appreciate you tuning in. Take care.
Until next time.
All right.